As the render completes, her image crystallizes more than a model, a form that tantalizes.
Hello everyone, it's your host MX2, and in this video we'll be going over the release log for boxcutter 719_10 all the way up to 720_4. While this is a rather long release log, I must express that it's also broken up on the Hops channel into its necessary sections and also into different chapters on the sales page. With that said, quite a lot has happened with boxcutter. We spend a lot of our time, of course, fighting the bugs that are introduced by Blender's various changes. While it may sound like I'm complaining, I'm definitely not. I want Blender to be as strong as possible. I want Blender to continue to improve and become great, because the better it becomes, the better we can become. And some of the dreams that we have really need Blender to be at its best, at a level that's even further than where it is now. So as Blender continues to get better, I continue to plan and hope for that day when we can begin to do things of a unique nature far beyond what we're even talking about today. So while in this release log, it may sound like I'm going a little bit hard on boxcutter and maybe not even talking about it in the most flattering way. I just want to show that when I'm testing boxcutter, I am pushing it to the max. Personally, I am trying to really justify the cases that we're adding to it. So whenever things aren't working, I don't want to gloss over it and let it be just left as a footnote. I want it to remain focal and I want it to be resolved, because that is the purpose of this tool. The purpose of this tool is to do its purpose. So anytime it fails to do its purpose, I look at that as a failure needing to be mitigated. Now you're probably wondering about this shape up on the screen. This shape is called 8-cylinder complex, which is a shape related to install. I built it using boxcutter, of course, because I always love a little boxcutter, but really it's all about how you solve it back to quads and dealing with problematic geometry, because the geometry it originally gave me was definitely the worst geometry ever. But that is a whole nother topic altogether. We want to get in and talk about boxcutter. So without further ado, let's jump in and begin talking about boxcutter 719_10 up to 720_4. Hello everyone, I'm your host MX2, and in this video we'll be going over the release log for boxcutter 719_10. And continuing with that retroactive time analysis angle, we'll be going over things that happened far in the past, but we'll be talking about them as far as how they pertain to us in this current day, because Blender has changed immensely, and as a result we have changed immensely. So what was once a feature of the past might be a piece of garbage today. So let us go forward and just analyze what's going on with these tools and just get analytical and test and see what we have going on with boxcutter 719_10, but from the perspective of boxcutter 7.20.4. In this scenario, we're in cut mode with Ngon, and what I'm going to do is just begin drawing a line, and we'll just draw a quick shape, and we'll just press B to bevel, and we already have the Q bevel present. And basically now, whenever you have Q bevel present, you're able to grab a dot and translate. This is something that we were struggling with and required quite a few revisions, but we were able to accomplish something that at least looks suitable for dealing with at least the Ngon system at this time. So looking at it even retroactively, I still see that there's additional work that needs to be done, but I'm hoping that giving it a little bit of time away allows us to basically reapproach it with clean eyes and think of other ways we can approach this and resolve how we translate and deal with the bevel and Ngon and Q bevel all at the same time in a way that's intuitive to users to get them where they want to go. And looking at this in 2024, I am pleased with what we're looking at whenever it comes to Ngon, Q bevel, points, and boxcutter. Currently I have my alignment set to longest edge, which allows me to use the longest edge given to us by the mirror modifier. So whenever I draw a shape, it's just automatically aligned straight. Otherwise, it would go wayward using the nearest edge. So we want to change our mode from cut to make, but before that, notice that whenever I perform a cut with join, or perform a cut with cut, obviously I can't perform a cut with join, I can only perform a join with join, but if I perform a cut using cut, that the cut is placed in the cutters collection. If I switch over to make, notice that the shape is now also being created in the same collection as the shape that it originated in. So basically the root collection, if we press period on the numpad, we can actually focus on the piece that's selected. So we'll select this, and we're now focusing on that piece as a child of the piece that we're cutting on. So basically we're no longer adding this to the root collection of the whole scene. Previously in boxcutter, if you were to press M, we could place it into the scene collection, and pretty much every make object would be placed here, and it was just something that just drove me crazy. So while it is small, it does mean something to me. Now objects that we add are placed into the root collection of the object that we are basically basing it off of. Hello everyone, and here we are with boxcutter 719_11. So this one we will be talking more about dots and how the addition of double extrude basically changed life, but for the most part we kept this update fairly small, and without further ado, let's dive into it. So from here, what we want to do is just click and drag and draw a box, and we'll tab to pause this box. If you've been using boxcutter for many years, you're already used to the modern day luxury of being able to draw a box and pause it and have a variety of dots dealing with offset, extrude, and also being able to middle mouse button drag over certain dots in order to bevel them. So this is something that's already been in boxcutter for a while, but we're just showing as a feature like when we first added it, because while it's a modern day luxury to you, I was there for its original birth twice. So this is its rebirth the second time, which brought its own connected issues just related to the complexities related to 2.8 and things going forward with it. But we did continue to battle with box and beveling and points in order to get it to be something that's at least robust and predictable for general use, even though there are still things that we wish were definitely better with it. So right now I have my view rotated like I'm about to fight Walter at the end of Armored Core, because I want you to be able to read the top bar. So you can see that I'm basically changing over to grid, and we're just going to rotate the view and just bring up a grid with control, and we're just going to draw a grid or draw a shape, and I'll hold Alt in order to extrude both ways. And basically that is the feature in a nutshell. You press Alt during your extrude and you're able to extrude both ways. So to demonstrate it even more, we'll just continue a cut, and I will cut on one side, but we'll hold Alt in order to cut both ways. So it's really a very small thing, but really just one of those things that I felt was a very important quality of life feature that was needed for this particular tool. So if you do not like double extrude, you're able to adjust that under input. Let's see, Alt double extrude is able to be disabled if you have a problem with it, but for general use, most people are only using Alt in order to recenter their shapes if they're drawing from center versus drawing from corner, which you see me doing here. But if you're in the extrude process, just holding Alt will allow you to just push it both ways. So sometimes it just come in handy whenever you're just working details in multiple directions at the same way, or when you're working details in opposite directions at the same time. It's just one of those things that I found became more handy as I use it more often. So hopefully it comes in handy for you as well. And here we are at boxcutter 719_12. For this release, there wasn't really a whole lot going on. You know, our goal is always to mainly deal with the small print, which is fixing the things that we advertise and making sure that they continue to work and that they work as good as advertised. It's very important to me that the things that we advertise continue to work as good as advertised. I cannot stress this enough. If we advertise it and then it breaks immediately afterwards, then what did we sell? What did we make? Was it even worth the effort? What did we make? So this retroactive review, its purpose really is to review these things in the context of time to ensure that the things that we are doing matter in the scheme of time. And if they do, then all of our work is validated. But if not, then we really have to evaluate what we're doing and what solutions we're offering and what we actually are aiming for. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So whenever it comes to alignment in boxcutter, there's a system called dots, and there's an alternative to dots called static dots. In the event that dots fails, you have static dots that you can enable, which will allow you to align dots on the surface to whatever you're trying to go for. In this case, I have view enabled, but now we have static dots on the surface. And the thing about static dots is When you have a static dot, you're able to roll the wheel to basically bring up alternative alignment planes for these dots. For example, if I want to align my shape to a plane to cut this at an angle, I'm able to using static dots versus dynamic dots actually not being built for that sort of behavior or mobility. But static dots was actually made with that sort of mobility in mind. So for that reason, some users prefer to stay in static dots all the time, myself included. Sometimes, depending on the situation, sometimes the beauty of dynamic dots along with the simplicity always does the job, but in the cases where it doesn't, we have static dots. But one of the things that it always lacked was in the event that you are not selecting anything and you hold control, you wouldn't get a dot for world because that was exclusive to dynamic dot. And then if you were in view mode, you wouldn't have a dot whenever you held control for that because that was also exclusive to dynamic dot. In fact, static dots is basically using the dot of dynamic mode in order to provide it to just fill in that hole, because even though the systems are different, I do feel that they both could share a solution there. So as a result, static dots now has a dot pertaining to view. And what this means is that if you roll the wheel, you can see at the bottom that the hypothetical grid size that this dot is pertaining to is being scaled down. In fact, if you wanted a real grid, you would just go and enable static grid and turn off dots and enable grid, and we basically now have a grid aligned to the world. In fact, but if we want it to align to our view, that's where things get a little bit more complicated, because view is something that is actually exclusive to dynamic. So if we were to just get out of static grid, we see that view grid is just a thing, just inherently for dynamic grid. So we will have to go back and actually visit static grid still, even now, we will still need to go back and revisit static grid to ensure that we have a grid also for view alignment. But one of the beautiful parts about static grid, while I'm over here talking smack about it, is that you're able to right click and scale your grid to be permanent, and then hold shift in order to just leave it just there. You're able to press R to rotate it. You can press R and X to rotate on your axis. So if you need a very specific type of grid, you're able to get that. And here I'm able to just shift scrolling the wheel to just adjust the segments that are being shown on this grid. So it's a very beautiful, very simple grid, very basic, and sometimes that's what users need. They just need a traditional grid for performing angular cuts and drawing shapes on aligned surfaces without having to deal with all the rigmarole of a grid that's fading on the edges and disappearing. They can just have a grid that just stays as long as they need it, and then if they want to get rid of it, they can just press escape. So that is just a real quick synopsis of static grid and grid in general, and a quick rundown of the difference between the two grids, hopefully to give you some insight on how to get more acquainted with the grids in boxcutter. So whenever it comes to boxcutter, if we press Alt W to start, there's this thing called join exact. We'll press D to go into the helper, and if we click on join, we see that there's a toggle for join exact. And what this means is that if we were to just draw a shape into join, we are now joining it to the surface. Instead of having the typical alignment that we're used to with cut and other operations, we now have the shape being drawn flush with the surface. In order to show this in action working properly, let us apply all the geometry, and we'll just go in edit mode and just grab edges and begin dissolving them. And if the shape disintegrates, that means that the join was not successful. But this is basically one of the ways that I test out join exact, just to ensure that everything's working. So we'll grab this point, we'll join it here, merge it last, and we see that this point also did not join properly. So join is something of a struggle with us that has been ongoing, but I want to demonstrate that even though it can work in some cases, it's not perfect in all cases. And this is something that we are still analyzing even to this day. In fact, we see that this shape is not truly connected with the surface, which is quite a terrible Boolean catastrophe. But if we just connect these 2 points, at last, we are able to basically disintegrate that. And continuing on, we're just looking at what we have going on. And let's press Ctrl Shift B to bevel this into 2 points, and we'll turn on Verti-mergy mode and also jump into Vertex mode, because this process is something that can definitely be sped up. Let's grab this edge and disintegrate it. And do you think this one worked out? I was just being pessimistic, assuming that it did not work out, but it appears that I was right. So let's just snap this here, and we'll be able to disintegrate that. But it appears that this side also did not have a full connection, so let us go ahead and help that. With this shape, I'm pressing Ctrl Shift B, And we'll connect here, connect there, and now we should be able to disintegrate this. So the final area is this one. Let's analyze what we have, and we see that this join operation did not work successfully either. So this is just part of the cleanup process of dealing with booleans whenever boolean tools don't work out when it comes to making their connections. But here we now have the shape connected the way it's supposed to. Of course, we could have done that a myriad of other ways. In fact, we could have just cut a little more off the top using boxcutter, and that would have actually done the job. But we started off in join mode, and we don't want that. So let's try it again. Let's press X, and we just want to press E to extrude that out, and just like that, we've cleaned that off. But I wanted to demonstrate how inaccurate it was by showing the cleanup process, because whenever things are inaccurate, there is a cleanup process afterwards that's required, and this is something we need to mitigate and resolve. So trying it again, we are still in join exact. We're just going to draw a box, and did it work? Did it work? No. No. I'm actually disappointed that it did not work. But let's just reconnect it. And so now we have this side. A curious bit of geometry, you know, the way it looks right there. I was about to disintegrate it, but that would have eaten more than I wanted, so let's just place it where it's supposed to. But we see that this minimal amount of cleanup adds up. With the more shapes that we're doing that don't join properly, there is more work to be done. So with that, I will be checking into this to see what can be done to get this even better. But retroactively, I see that join exact has gotten a little bit lazy over time, and its solution will need another swing of the old monkey wrench. So between major updates, I like to go in and do usability updates where we just make sure that the workflow is being refined and just everything is as fluid as possible. For boxcutter 719_13, I wanted to really focus on adding some of the things that have become pretty boilerplate in hard ops, like moving the modifier. That's something that I've become used to. Also indications. Indication is always one of those things that we struggle with, and any improvement to indicating systems to the user to make the user more intelligent, more aware, and also to clearly let them know what is going on is always welcome. So without further ado, let's dive in. Whenever you're cutting in boxcutter, the sort system just kind of places the modifier for you. And that's fine in most cases. Sometimes a user will want to turn sort off. And if they are working with sort off, then that means that the modifier is being placed at the end of the stack as if boxcutter had no sense of flair or design. However, if you hold shift and you roll the wheel, you are able to move the modifier up the stack in order to place a modifier exactly where you want. So you can see where basically I went from being shaded badly because I was after the auto smooth to before auto smooth to now being before bevel. So basically this is just another way that you can work in the event that you find yourself needing to adjust your modifier placement in the middle of working. You're now able to do that. So we'll just pause this again, shift scroll it up, get it placed exactly where we need to, and now we are able to just keep on adding these shapes with the perimeter bevel, just basically protecting them upon entry. Of course, we want to prevent them from overlapping, and then of course in between this we may also want to put a triangulate modifier, so that way now it can translate over to subdivision if we're just trying to be really hacky with subdivision. But once we have so many modifiers stacked up like this, it will begin to get a little weirder. We of course always want smooth by angle at the very end, but let us collapse these. Let's perform a cut, and I'm already saying in my heart, fingers crossed, please don't relocate these mods. In fact, we will need to press Shift C and change it from local longest edge to local, just so we align to the shape. And we see that with subdivision added, it begins to choke, and also it begins to get very weird with the modifier. So let's say that you wanted to keep this very particular modifier stack order. Me personally, I would say sort, do not go any further than subdivision. So basically every modifier past this will now be left alone. So if I were to perform a cut, the boolean will definitely be placed at the end. And then if I hold shift and I scroll it up, we jump up one mod, we jump up two mods, we jump up three mods, we jump up four, and now we're exactly where we need to be. But what if we wanted to be exactly there? Then instead of all this modifier move business, let us turn on sort modifiers. Let us just move this underscore to be Let's make the underscore be here. And we probably don't even need an underscore altogether because sort should just work for these scenarios. But we see that sort did not work because subdivision got moved to where the Boolean is. So let us tame sort because we don't want sort to do that to us. We don't want subdivision to do that to us. And also we want sort to handle subdivision and we don't want to have to use an override to do it. So let's take a look at our stack. And subdivision isn't being sorted. Now we see that the cut is being civil. So there's always an automatic way to make it work. So that's what I wanted to point out, just going through these different scenarios of it being unreasonable. And now we finally are making it reasonable because even with such a strange sort of mod, wow, that thing made me look like a fool the moment I started shifting around. There we go. So whenever we come up with these unique, strange scenarios that, you know, for some reason have to work, just letting you know that there are systems to make it work, and there's even overrides to force it to work, even if you need to force a system to work that just doesn't even make sense. For example, why on earth would a person need to do this? Why would a person want to do this? It's hard on the computer, it's hard on you, it's hard on the mouse, but for some reason it also looks pretty good. So let us go back, let's ever scroll, bring that back. I don't know why at the last minute it goes weird. It's just testing us. But with that, that demonstrates the idea. You can now move modifiers up the stack, but also just showing a little bit about modifier sorting and how you can basically use it to your advantage. As mentioned previously, boxcutter has two grids. The main one is called grid, or as I like to call it, dynamic grid. Here we bring it up on screen, and to the astute viewer, they may notice that there is a subgrid now, meaning there's a grid inside of the grid. If we hold shift, we are now aligning to the grid inside of the grid. So let us just align to the grid inside of the grid and just draw a shape inside of it and perform a cut, and that is all there is to it. Whenever drawing any shape, pressing W will trigger its transition into wedge. If you need to understand which direction your wedge is happening, there is now an indicator line visually to let you know. For some reason it took us forever to add an indicator line, but I am very big on indication and I love letting users know things. So now that you know which direction your wedge is happening, you also know that basically the wedge will dynamically adjust its wedge direction based on how you draw the shape. So if you're drawing a shape like this, we see that the wedge will come down in a way that we don't necessarily want, but we now know it, so we can press W to reverse that direction and then get the desired wedge result. But just like that, we are able to wedge and indicate it inside of boxcutter. Sometimes the most important updates are the ones that seemingly have nothing going on. For those updates, it means that we spent more time reflecting internally on the internal systems and how to make them last forever, how to have them connect to each other across tools, and how to have them just work better and faster and argue over what can better be done to make them work efficiently with each other. So for this update, nothing happened that's of note, but that doesn't mean that it's not an important update. It was a foundational update that did definitely set up a future tone for the updates that come afterwards. Here we are in boxcutter and we are in cut and circle. And believe it or not, there was a time when using circle and using bevel would result in you losing a vertex group. And believe it or not, losing a vertex group is actually very bad. But just looking at it now, we see that losing a vertex group is an issue of the past. It's not even a thing now, but at the time of this update, it was a very serious issue because users don't completely understand why they lose their vertex groups. They only just see, I lost my vertex groups with this product and I'm now very angry about it. So for us, it was just a matter of we must resolve this vertex group issue immediately. In fact, now that we have vertex groups able to remain, we're able to use things like hard ops and pressing spacebar during bevel to jump between each bevel if we're needing to adjust each one individually. But for the most part, that is what it was all about for this update on a user level. So now we're getting back into the gist of things. Boxcutter 719_15 basically consisted of an improvement with local mode and some adjustments with the world object fallback adjustment. Previously it always required a selection and we just wanted it to be basically a little more independent of that. And then of course the small stuff is always extensive. As we continue to work, we always have an immense amount of small stuff, which is just us having to go and clean up the tool behind ourselves to make sure that it continues to work good going forward. But this is becoming a larger and larger struggle as we continue working with the tool. So if I were to take this mesh and perform a cut on it with these modifiers in the order that they are, more than likely Blender will close. At the very least, this mesh will ask for a divorce or a dual. But let's take a look at what we have with our scale. So we see that the scale is unapplied. And I am curious as to what will happen if we try to apply the scale, but the purpose of this is to demonstrate something happening with local mode. So we're just going to, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to just hit it with Smart Apply. And then we are going to just Control A and apply to scale because we just don't want any weirdness. And then from here we can go into local mode. And the purpose of this is simply to say that now when you're working in local mode, excuse that, I don't know why that happened. We have it at corner. Let's try that one more time. And now we're able to perform our cut as expected. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where that weirdness came from. But instead of doing a retake, we will just roll with that. So now we want to get something oriented in this area. And really there's no issue because there's nothing happening outside of local mode that would cause raycasting issues with this. But for this area that we're working on here, because there's meshes that are overlapping outside of this mode, we could experience issues with it when it comes to raycasting. And the point of this is just to say that those issues have been resolved. It's strange to talk about local mode so much, but local mode has really required a special amount of focus from us just to get it to function the way that we need it to, just because local mode is just a whole new beast inside this new generation. In fact, our error management system is now, you just click it and it just manages the error. We'll talk about that as we get to it later. But for now, let us just perform another wedge cut. And we'll press E, and then E again. And just perform a couple of quick cuts. And we may want to mirror this to the other side, just really looking at thinking about, is this a mirrored shape? Let's Alt X, press A to add a new mirror. And we'll just mirror this over to the other side. And with that, we can come back out of local and we see that all of these cuts that we did were being intersected with by other meshes. And for some reason, working in local mode, when there's other meshes interfering with it, will just, for some reason, interfere with the raycasting, just letting you know that that's no longer a thing. So go on and cut where no one will ever see it. Go ahead, just give it a try. So right now, I have nothing selected, and if I were to enable view alignment, I'm able to begin drawing working from view. This was something that was previously unavailable in boxcutter for some reason. It was just probably an oversight or something. In fact, the computer is lagging a little bit because I'm deleting a whole bunch of files in the background, so I'll have to redraw that shape again. But yeah, I'm going through a bunch of computer issues just in the background that is just really making things miserable for me right now. So we will just try to work through them. But we're just basically just drawing shapes aligned to view. And then of course we can press D and bring up our hops helper, or our box helper, sorry, wrong helper. And then from there we can just draw shapes and just continue drawing aligned to this view. As long as we don't rotate the view, we can just keep working here. So even with circle, same situation, we could just draw some circles. We can pause it, press D, go in and set it to something like 32 so it's not so faceted, and then go ahead and apply that. And we'll just draw a few more circles, and from here we'll draw a couple of rectangles and maybe a square and maybe a happy little square here. And you know what's crazy is I would actually try to merge all of these shapes and turn it into some sort of crazy gun just as an exercise. So you know, while I'm looking at this, I was about to say, why would a person work this way? And I was about to answer my own question, because I would actually turn this into some sort of crazy ray gun and make all of these components work together, even though when I rotate the view, the question is, why would I draw it in this view instead of just looking at it from top-down view? So that part is a question for another video, but just letting you know that now if you toggle view and you have nothing selected, you are able to draw a line to view. When it comes to boxcutter 719_16, only one major feature was added. However, we spent a lot of time dealing with the small stuff. As always, bug fixes take up a large amount of time. It's very important for everything to work properly. So I see in the extended notes that there was definitely quite a bit of breakdown when it came to this release and just making it work in general. This was also the part where 4.0 was about to come out, and also Macs began giving us quite a bit of business. Every now and then, Apple computers will just demonstrate to us that they are very unique by showing that they are using different drivers, different architecture, different paths, or whatever. They just demonstrate that they are different to every other version, and they just give us business in their own individual way. And so that also continues with some of these versions going forward. I'm just seeing that in the extended notes. Just thought I'd mention it as a fun fact, that in case you're caring about it more intimately than I'm presenting it, that yes, Macs were giving us quite a bit of business at this time, just like they were giving us a bit of business just last week. There's always a point in which we are finding ourselves discussing Apple computers and why they're giving us such a hard time with creating bevels. Sometimes just because an idea works doesn't mean it's always widely accepted. 3D array is one of those. For example, if we were to draw this box cut and then we shift it to live, we press Q and we use array v2, we're seeing that we're in something called 2D, where basically if we move the mouse, it's adjusting the distance, but if we press V, it will now use where the cursor is placed to adjust where the end of the array goes. And this is actually a much nicer way to work. So we'll right click to cancel that, and we'll go ahead and X and delete that particular modifier. In fact, because of the hard-ups release modifier log, or because the hops release log, let's Control Shift click manage to wash that mod out of here. And now let's draw a box with boxcutter, and we see that when we press V, that the shape is actually stuck to the cursor, just like I was showing on the hard op side, until we start to roll the wheel. Then it becomes a little bit inaccurate, showing that it's a little overdue for maintenance in the scheme of time, but we are able to simply use it as a way to deal with the distance a lot better than dealing with the whole magnitude system that we were dealing with inherently. So if we roll it down, we are able to get this to something manageable, but it's just a slightly different way of dealing with array. Of course, if you want to deal with it manually, you can always press D and go into helper and adjust the parameters manually, as you see me doing here. In fact, we can even go in here and adjust the depth as well by pulling the Z axis, just in case we want to get really procedural with how we're trying to set this up. But just letting you know that boxcutter's array now uses a 3D system, which has been in place for quite a while already, so it's really already been a mainstay, but this part is just talking about when it was initially added. So here we are at boxcutter 719_17. This one was a minor release, but the most major part of it was support for Blender 4.0. Blender 4.0 was a major change, but it wasn't as major as we thought it was. 4.1 turned out to be the most major change to everything. So 4.0 was just us just barely surviving. We survived into it, and it was like, wow, we survived this. We had to do so much work to survive into 4.0, and then it turned out that over the horizon was 4.1. And 4.1 was going to be a survival adventure unlike any other. So there's not really anything feature-wise to demonstrate, but just to really set the tone for what was going on, 4.0 was intense, and 4.1 was going to become even more intense, but we just didn't know it yet. So the main thing about this update is that this began Blender 4.0 official support, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a couple of new features that I couldn't have had added in, so we'll be going over those. There's always going to be small stuff. There's always small stuff, there's always bug fixes, there's always refinement of previous features that were added, and that's not a problem. It's just part of the adventure. The adventure is adding new things while ensuring that the old things are always working and never not working, because it's important that the things that we advertise are always working. So with that aside, let's dive into boxcutter 719_18. So in hard hops, you can just press Alt X, and that will allow you to bring up the mirror gizmo, and you can just perform a mirror operation inside of hard hops. However, whenever it comes to boxcutter, it has the lesser known feature of being able to basically draw a shape, and then if you press the semicolon, you can bring up the mirror gizmo. And we're just going to click on the side of the axis, and now we are mirroring on the Y, and we still are inside the operation. We can press semicolon again, and we can bring up the gizmo again in order to mirror on the X. And if we want to, we can press the semicolon again and mirror also on the Z. If you don't want to press the semicolon over and over, we also support shift. So I'm holding shift and I'm just clicking on the negative handles in order to undo the mirroring that's been activated for them. A lot of discussion was had about what these handles should do and how they should react. For example, this handle is disabled, but we can't really see it because the mouse cursor is over it. And me asking that the tooltip be offset is actually an unreasonable request because this is a Blender level request. So having Blender's tooltip be covered up by the mouse is probably something I need to take up with Blender, but Blender isn't trying to hear from me. So let's click on the X-axis and let's click on the Y, and let's also click on the Z. And now you see that I'm able to basically use it while it is still open. But just to go over a little bit of it, for some reason this gizmo never caught on, but it is a thing in boxcutter. So sometimes you may be working and you just need to perform a cut and mirror it to the other side, and then you would just press a semicolon to bring that up, or you would just draw and you would just press 1 or 2 or 3 in order to mirror on the X, Y, or Z, which is our classic system. In fact, the purpose of the gizmo is to take away the 1, 2, 3 system of the mirror, so that way we can add numerical entry into boxcutter. So now that we're talking about the mirror gizmo, now that you're aware, you'll be aware that yes, we'll someday be adding numerical input to boxcutter, but in order to do that, we have to take back all of the numbers. So you can't just be pressing numbers during operations unless you're not inside this numerical input mode that we're discussing at this time. But just letting you know that there is a mirror gizmo inside of boxcutter, just less used, but still there for you in the event. And all you have to do is just press semicolon on your keyboard, and then from there we can just choose which side we want to mirror it to by clicking the side that we want to keep. Keep in mind that whenever you use it, that the other axis will say disabled, so you shouldn't be able to click it. In fact, a big argument was had that the disabled axis should be basically shown in black to be inert, but instead it's actually doing it on the active side. So even now, I still feel the need to argue about that, but a lot of arguments was had about the gizmo to make it exactly the way we wanted, but really this comes down to how do we want users to use boxcutter. And so this gizmo is not that it didn't work out, it's that the way that we're offering it isn't the most intuitive way for users to use a gizmo with boxcutter at this time. So just letting you know that it's there, also just letting you know that someday we'll be improving it. Inset is the most risky and unstable operation that we perform inside of boxcutter. And so for that reason, we always are trying to improve it. We always want Inset to be better, but Inset just fundamentally is heavy. It uses the original mesh to make the derived mesh, which basically means that you can create a very heavy derived mesh, which can make Inset very slow. So because of that, we've tried some things with Inset. Right here, we have an option called clamp Inset. So basically, if we have it enabled, this means that whenever we draw and press I for Inset, Inset will jump to an automatic level to ensure that Inset works. So to the casual listener, that sounds awesome. That sounds like great. We want Inset to just work. But if we continue using it, we see that, you know, the first cut works, the second cut works. Let's try the third one. Inset continues to work. And keep in mind, we are using an automatic Inset, so I haven't even had to press T. But we see that as we continue, the shape gets smaller and smaller. And this is something that can truly get problematic, especially as you start dealing with different areas of the mesh. For example, we could understand this becoming very thin and shallow in this area. Of course, we've insetted it about 4 times now. But this area is a clean, vacant area. We press I, and it jumps over to something reasonable. But when we press spacebar, it jumps to something unreasonable. Let's try that again. We'll press I, and I'm just going to make sure to pull this face out, And that actually is not a bad inset. So let's try that again. Inset might have been healed so much over time that it's no longer going to make a laughing stock out of me. But initially, whenever we first added Inset, it definitely had some concerns that needed to be addressed, and us testing it at a later point in time definitely has set us up to deal with Inset in a way where it's not as cruel as it initially would have been if we would have showcased it at the state that it was originally released. But we see that these decrementing insets can, be both beneficial and possibly annoying depending on how much you want your inset to be made shallow. In fact, look, now this inset is so small that we are needing to press T and adjust it to find out exactly what is the value, but we don't know what the value is because now we know what the value is. We're getting a little warmer. So really the warm value that Inset should have given us was something around there, but really Inset isn't going to know that via the automatic system. So one of the lessons of boxcutter has been that, as much as we want automatic systems to be assistive, sometimes they actually stand in the way of the user getting where they need to go. So we have to use them sparingly. But in this case, we're using just automatic inset, and it's just working. It's actually not being very bad in this case. In fact, we could up the ante and use a circle. I call the circle 32 rounds of doom because it is definitely no cube. A cube is easier to cut in, but a circle has just so many angles involved that Inset just automatically is going to get complicated. But we see that Inset still is allowing us to work with it. However, how good automatic Inset is working still is to be, discovered. So let's bring in another cut. We'll press I, and automatic Inset jumped us to this. So basically, after so many insets, it's getting very short on patience with what it's allowing for us. But that is an automatic solution for you, just showing you that auto inset was added to this particular version and that you're able to enable it with clamp inset, which wasn't done initially. Initially, it was just there by default. We came back later and realized, hey, users are not liking this, so we need to put it on a toggle and we need to disable that toggle. For this particular update, it was just about the small stuff, and the small stuff is fixing that inset that was mentioned in a previous video. Inset has always just given us the business. It's a very popular topic in fan mail and something that I will always find myself discussing. In fact, maybe one day on my deathbed I'll be discussing how Inset is my greatest regret because Inset just requires so much of the mesh underneath. And really the purpose of this update was to just improve what we had going on with Inset to make it a little bit more streamlined for users, because the version that we had was just so automatic that it was beginning to get a little cruel. So without further ado, let's dive in. So when a customer writes me about the Inset, they are just writing about it on a technical level. They aren't sympathetic to the experimental procedures that we're attempting with it to try to make it faster or better or more unique or different or better. They just care about why Inset is not like the videos. All right. So we just draw a few cuts, just having fun here. Nothing major. I like to toggle off a box and toggle back in the box in order to reset things out of box. Just me being weird. In fact, I don't know what happened there. We're just going to pretend that did not happen. And continuing on. So something like that. Now we have a little bit of a complex happening. So now let's pretend we're a brand new customer. They're going to perform a cut and they're going to try that fancy new inset. And when they press I, okay, that's fine. They're like, whoa, inset's kind of cool. I want to try inset again. So they try it again. And of course we want to make sure that we're over the mesh in the right place. And now we see that Inset just isn't getting us there. In fact, we press T and it's not letting us really get much as far as adjustments are concerned. However, whenever it comes to the frustrations that Inset was causing in its automated days, that it was like completely mad, its issues came down to basically it adjusting the inset after you've already paused it from adjusting the inset to perfection. So here I'm trying to just create an inset, but this mesh appears to already be falling apart. And so let's go ahead and do a smart apply. And I just want to analyze this mesh, because why is this mesh falling apart? We just made it. We're going to go ahead and hit it with a clean mesh. And it's really treating us like we used exact on this, and we didn't. We just perform normal Boolean operations. But this is why Inset is so risky, because Inset does very weird things to the mesh, and you're not always completely aware of it because these things are live Boolean modifiers. But I'm just trying to prove how automatic Inset can definitely be problematic. And it's because of these sort of things happening, because the user isn't fully aware that there's automatic systems happening. And because of that, we have to put these sort of things on toggles. And really, whenever you look at boxcutter and you see us a slew of toggles, is because we want to offer users a chance to opt into all of these unpredictable behaviors that they possibly aren't exactly agreeing to. I find it important that you agree to whatever it is that you're trying to do once you're getting into the tool, so that way you can toggle it to the way that you prefer it be. As a result, it's resulted in more toggles than normal, but this is something that also has resulted in a tool that's also more option based and more customizable than normal, because I can go in here, for example, and turn on alternate extrude because of my personal belief that if I draw a cut and I move the mouse, it should basically cut the view based on where I'm looking. But back to Inset. We're just talking about how Inset should be a particular way out of the box, and that the version that we offer to customers should be a little bit more stable than what we were initially offering. So now we see that Inset is able to be left in that clamp state, and it won't be so bad. But previously it was actually quite bad. And really the whole purpose of this update was prompted by a user saying like, hey, what the heck happened to your Inset? Your Inset is terrible. It's like more terrible than usual, and it turned out that he meant it was more terrible than it's ever been. So as a result, you now have clamp Inset delegated to a checkbox, and if you want to experiment having an automatic clamp, just know that it is a preference that you enabled, and you could disable it if you want it to go back to being classic. Hello. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and here we are talking about boxcutter 720_1. For this update, quite a bit happened. For the most part, the revelation of 4.1 having a massive auto smooth change became apparent, and then this update was to deal with the 4.1 support of the auto smooth modifier. As a result, there were a massive amount of bug fixes that had to be done, and so this update turned out to be pretty massive. But to the user, it's very small, because we basically just fixed Inset once again to make it less silly, and then we added support for auto smooth. So without further ado, let's dive in. So Inset bevel is a very strange one to discuss. Basically, we want to bevel inside of boxcutter, but boxcutter is a cutter, so that means we have to bevel using a cutter. So we have to be creative with how we bevel using boxcutter. So Inset bevel is actually our second attempt at beveling inside of boxcutter, with our first attempt not making it yet to market. We'll press SX2 to scale this out, and I'll press Control A to apply the scale. But really, why are we applying the scale? I'm going to just Alt W to start boxcutter, and we're just going to draw an inset as you're used to, and we can drag the box for bevel, and we can also drag the box for inset, and we see that now we're performing what's called an inset bevel. But because I did not check the button for apply scale, scale was unapplied. So let's try it again. There's a reason that apply scale is on by default, but for me, when I'm testing, I like to have it off just to make sure that the issues I'm facing are not caused by scale being applied and giving me what I call serendipity, which is just everything working out nicely. So we see that when we're in Inset, there's this new spiky dot. The spiky dot allows you to grab it and basically bevel, and we see that when we bring it all the way in, it brings us something rounded, and basically that's all there is to it. We'll press H in order to see what we're doing, and of course everything's still live, so we're able to make adjustments, but basically we're now able to perform rounded bevels on shapes whenever it comes to Inset. So it is a very experimental technique. In fact, there's a good chance it will more than likely not work in more complex cases, because it is very experimental. I was quite against the idea of actually adding Inset bevel to boxcutter, because I wasn't sure how the product tree would go for it, how it would improve in the future and become a more suitable feature. In fact, here we see that somehow we messed up our shading. So let's see what did it. And if we put an double exclamation point on the way to normal, we are good to go. Every now and then we have to take a quick look at the modifier stack and evaluate what's going on, because shading is just so variable now. But just want to let you know that there is a new feature now called Inset bevel, and all it requires is that we'll Shift V, choose nearest edge, we'll press I, press T, and this mesh has already been through a bit. So bevel is already a bit nervous to deal with because, as you know, bevel clones the mesh. So if we're cloning the mesh and that mesh isn't working out, then it can get problematic. And I'm glad that this actually happened, because it gives me a moment to talk more about Inset on a technical level, which is boring, I know, but also necessary. So let's look at this cutter. We're taking this into local mode. This is our cutter for Inset. And why can't this cutter be thicker? Why can't we make it thicker? You know, we try to go thicker and we see that it begins popping very weirdly. So the function of Inset is doing its job. The mesh that we're giving it isn't really holding up its end of the bargain. It's trying its best, but it really isn't getting very far. So let's try applying just a couple of modifiers just to see if we can help it out. And to make this work, to truly make this work, is going to take a bit of work. And by a bit of work, I mean, me personally, I would just start applying modifiers very hard. Where is the modifier I'm looking for? That one. So we just want to just grab this inside face, and we will manually push it down. And we will grab these faces and Alt S push them inwards. And this is the type of level of control that we need with Inset. We need to be able to control Inset on the second level. So I'm discussing it in this video, coming to a feature near you sometime, intimate bevel control. But usually I get in and I mess with these things manually to try to figure out exactly how it would work on the back end. So when I'm doing these technical explanations like this, that there's something to talk about, because I can't just say, oh, the coder made it do this and that's how it works, because when you break it, I won't know what happened and how it broke. So it's important to have some sort of mechanical way to get in and deal with these things. I apologize for talking so long. I'll move on to the next section. Instead of recapping on auto smooth and the trauma it caused me, let's just talk about it on a technical level. Basically, if you right click, you now have the option to auto smooth from your right click menu. If we choose that, you now see that a smooth by angle has been added, and that's really all there is to it. If you were to jump into the hard ops auto smooth adjuster, which is shift clicking sharpen, then we see that we now add exclamation points to that same smooth by angle, and everything's just kept exactly where you want it. When it comes to boxcutter, if we were to basically perform a box cut, we see that the double exclamation point smooth by angle, the same one used by Blender, has been added. This is because I'm talking about it from a position of the future, talking about this thing in the past that, frankly, I don't even want to talk about the past situation that came up with it. But just know that we can right click, we can choose to auto smooth, we can choose to shade flat, we can choose to shade auto smooth, we can choose to shade flat, we can draw with boxcutter. We can right click, choose to shade flat, and just note that it now works the way it's supposed to, because it just took a lot of trial and error and also bugs and possibly pain. But now we are now working with the new auto smooth change that has been added to Blender. So just know that you can always at any time right click, choose to shade it as flat, right click, shade as smooth. You could just shift click sharpen to do it. You could do a box cut with box cut to deal with auto smooth. We try to handle auto smooth to the point that it's not even thought about by the user. But that still doesn't mean that the user doesn't need to be aware of it, because Blender is definitely trying to make it more well known by making it a prominent modifier in the modifier stack. So because it's a modifier in the stack, it has to be stacked, especially when you're maintaining such a delicate stack of the other modifiers. So for that reason, we are here talking about auto smooth today. But just know that we are now past it, and auto smooth is now good to go. For now. I say that now, not knowing that it will break tomorrow. So boxcutter 720_2. To you, the user, it means nothing. To me, It's lethargic. It's lethargic to be able to release an update that doesn't have anything that adds additional pressure to the product. To me, when I look at boxcutter, I see a big ball of pressure. I see a product that, is a constant battle to maintain, that must be maintained because, it serves a historical purpose in everyone's lives. It has to exist. We have to cut boxes. But I also see that boxcutter is a big ball of business to manage day to day, to keep maintained day to day, and I'm spending more time maintaining boxcutter than I'm using boxcutter. So having a utility update really to just get everyone on the same page as me with using the same version that I'm trying to use in videos that are being done behind the scenes is important. So while this update is meaningless, it did mean something to me. Hey, I'm back on stage talking about boxcutter 720_3. I got my stage of material, and it looks like we'll be talking about, mesh element snap. Okay, just one thing. Just kidding. So mesh element snap was a big one for me. It's really hard to snap while cutting. It's a thing that I discuss a lot, and I sound like a crazy person every time, but if you're cutting a surface, how do you align to a surface? If you're cutting into a surface, how do you calculate that surface if you're already cutting into it? If the surface is less, the moment you begin interfacing with it with your shape, then how do you orient and align yourself to it? These are just philosophical questions that we must ask ourselves. So without further ado, let's dive into boxcutter 720_3. Typically in boxcutter, the usage of precision is a little difficult due to the lack of precision when it comes to Boolean modifiers. For example, if I press Alt W, we start boxcutter and we're already in dots mode. So I'm going to just start here with the shape and we're just going to draw it over to the center, and basically we are doing what's called a hot line, which is where we are precisely cutting along something that we're not supposed to be cutting. And because we're in fast, this is problematic. In fact, you can see the cut not appearing. So if I press Alt E, we're now in exact and the cut is able to go through. But if we go back to fast, which is the default, we see that precision isn't there by default. But it is something that we want to deal with, and especially because of the exact modifier being present, we want to do something in relation with snapping. So I'm going to just perform a cut here, and what I'm going to do is go under the snapping panel, and we see this new option for mesh element, and we want to snap to vert. And then we see a second option that will basically set it to jump to exact the moment that you snap to element. So I'm just going to draw a shape and we'll extrude down, but instead I will hold control and hover. Let me move it so you can see it, and you see this dot appearing. That means that I'm now snapping to that element. So basically it's just a new way to work just a little more precise in case you are wanting to. For example, we are now just snapping to these places, just cutting. And really that's all there is to it. Sometimes you need to be able to cut with precision, and we're just letting you know that we are taking some steps in that direction, even though Blender itself doesn't necessarily like precision. In fact, we see here that the system still needs work because occasionally it will just miss the face by possibly a hair's hair. And this is something that we should do something about, but it very much is a struggle, especially because dealing with the offset and the extrude at the same time dynamically in the middle of an operation while maintaining the rules of keeping this sticking out of the surface but keeping this also sticking precisely into the surface begins to get a little complicated on a programming level. But just letting you know that mesh element snap is something that we are still working on and we look forward to improving in the future. But for now, if you have it on, you are able to just hold control and just instantly snap to a element inside of the shape that you're currently cutting in order to perform the operation. Hello everyone, it's your host MX2, and in this video we are finally up to the modern day talking about boxcutter 720_4. For this one, it was a rather small update. Our goal is always to try to do a little less now, to try to not go so big with these updates, because the bigger that we go, the bigger Blender breaks it. And it's become a pattern. Over the course of these release logs, I've noticed that we will do something, Blender will break it. We will do something, Blender will break it. And it shows that something must be done about this pattern. And so deep contemplation must be had on it. How do we exist when Blender is so unstable, But this is beyond the point of this release log. Really, we're to talk about what is going on with 720_4. So without further ado, let's dive in and begin. So whenever you're in boxcutter, you can just click on a shape and then click and draw to begin cutting. Right now I'm in wireframe. If I press H, this is generally what the shading looks like when you're using boxcutter. Nothing really to write home about. It's just a way of illustrating that you are performing a red cut. However, if we switch over to make, pressing A, we see that the make shape has kind of the same aesthetic as the red shape, except it's gray, and gray just doesn't translate as good to the viewer when it comes to conveying form as the red shape did. And also, because it's not doing anything to the mesh, the only thing that really gives us insight to what it's doing is the outline. And as a result, that has always been just kind of a downside of gray shape to me. In fact, it's driven me crazy. If we deselect and we just draw a couple of gray shapes, I've always said, why is gray shape so terrible? And of course the response is, well, we can alter some settings to make gray shape look better. I'm like, no. See, gray shape looks terrible no matter what settings you put, because it's a shape that's real, but we're drawing it as if it's a fake shape, and we need to actually draw it as if it's a real shape. And based on that thought, we were able to come up with something, at least to alleviate the solution in a way that satiates me. So if we just delete these shapes and we go under the behavior panel and we disable hide gray shape, now whenever we draw a box, it's now a solid shape. So we're actually able to see it interact with the shape that we're drawing against. In this case, a cube. We're actually able to see the cube interact with shape. I know this is so random and minor and unimportant to be talking about, but people ask for these release logs. They say they missed them, and this is the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. These are things that are being discussed. Is why does the shading for gray shapes just not match up? What is it that is missing? In my case, I feel there's probably a little ambient occlusion from them meeting each other, a little bit of shadow from them interacting. I mean, I'm looking at the shadows grow as I make it rise up, and you know, when Eevee shadows, or whenever the viewport shadows are working great, they are working very great. And I think the shadows are probably improving in Blender. You know, I haven't looked at them for a while, but I remember they used to be a little bit more broken and unusual. But now we're seeing that, you know, gray shape is actually casting a shadow, and that's what we want. We want gray shape to feel like it has an impact. So really it's very minor, just letting you know that hide gray shape's a thing, and if you want to use it, you can. If not, you can have gray shapes as invisible as they originally were. Here we are at the tail end of the boxcutter release log, talking about fonts once again. You know what I call that? I call that a pretty good day. It's a good day to talk about fonts. I love dealing with fonts, but that's probably because I'm a obsessant with branding, and branding, you know, the easiest way to brand something is with text. The other way is with color. But we'll just take some text and we're just going to say boxcutter. Sorry, I cut my finger earlier, so I'm just typing badly now, but work must go on. So in font cutter, I did put a band-aid on it. Sometimes I ignore that part. And inside of font, I called it font cutter, and that's a cool name. We'll press S to shuffle in font scroll, so we actually are grabbing something more random. And we're just looking for a text that, you know, we could go with this one. Notice that the R is not good. I was going to say a different R word that would have got me canceled. I don't know why. For this one would work. Let's put a space between the two T's though. So we'll press Q and we'll adjust the spacing just a little bit, just so we're not giving ourselves a bump chance here. So we'll press Alt W, start boxcutter, and we'll bring up one of my favorites, classic custom cutter. And with custom cutter, we'll press C to mark this custom shape of text as the cutter. And from here, we're able to simply just draw a box cutter, drew it in the wrong direction, and we see that the same benefits that we were talking about for hard ops, with the text receiving a degenerative pass of bad geometry disintegration, has resulted in us giving better T's than ever before. And I know you're probably listening to this thinking, you know, what's this guy talking about? What do you mean the letter T? I'm just saying the letter T, if you ever look over all of my histories, the letter T has given us some business. So anytime I see the letter T not being a T, I'm very happy. In fact, let's bring this down and let's try it again just with the letter T. Let's put a capital T and a lowercase t, and I have caps lock on. And we're just going to change the font to something else. We'll change it to, dang, Webdings is just, if you ever need to talk in hieroglyphics, am I right? So we'll just choose a random one. It doesn't matter what we choose because T's are T's, right? And we'll press C, and we're just going to draw these letter T's and extrude them in. And let's jump back into wireframe and just analyze what we received. Of course, these edges are just the random edges given to us by Blender's own calculation of us performing this random operation. If we wanted to assist that, we'll just put an edge loop. And we give this one edge loop 2, and it will also get some assistance. And here we are now looking at very beautiful letter T's. The letter T is just, my name doesn't even start with a T, and I care about the letter T. I mean, really, let's try the letter J. You know, we're having fun in this last part of the video. Yeah, my name starts with a J. You know, people will be doxing me in the comments, so doesn't matter. We will just press C, and let's just draw the letter J. And as I draw it the wrong direction, it makes me realize maybe I want a backwards direction because I'm so southpaw. My goal is to, at least for a tool that I'm working with, to have it at least cater to my left-handed propensities. I always require things to be left-handed. So if the tools aren't left-handed, I mean, even in a hard ops, we have an option to basically have your modal handedness be left, or pro tip, use left, of course, because left is, not even going to get political jokes being tapped on shoulder by producer, no left and right jokes, but just like that, just like that, I should tap in, I should cut in just like that. Get sued by HBO over the TV show. Just like that, season 3 coming back. Why do I know there's season 3? We won't talk about that. And also, I forgot about the text flipping. We're just having some fun. Not really trying to reference a TV show. But for this one, the text result actually looks better than I was expecting. I was expecting a few little stray edges just to, like what we're seeing in the E and in the A. But for the most part, having clean text just gives us a nice neutral starting point to start doing other stuff like dicing it and preparing to deform it. I mean, you really can't deform it in its original form. I mean, you sort of can when it's a curve, but you know, the curve geometry just isn't that beautiful, to be honest. In fact, the curve geometry actually looks like that. So when you're trying to deform it, you're actually deforming something like this. So whenever the text gets wayward, obviously we'll need some sort of better geometry solution for text whenever we do it. But that's a talk for another time. So with that, I end this release log, and I'll see you all next time. So even though over the course of this release log I demonstrated things in a less than suitable state and possibly discussed things in states that weren't completely flattering, that is because I've been kind of in this meta mode of doing a new type of tutorial where instead of doing the tutorial from the perspective of a salesman, I'm actually doing it from the perspective of myself, where I just literally talk about these tools from the perspective of how I see these things so that you, the customers, are more aware of how I do see these things, because it isn't just me looking at it and saying, ah, yes, that is fine. I look at everything and I think, wow, that needs more improvement. But I'm also very cautious of what Blender's doing as far as the future is concerned, because I do have a vision for this tool and I want to see it to fruition, and I see that time may be against me, and so therefore I must work harder and faster and more feverishly to try to get these things to their conclusions, because boxcutter is made to cut a box. It's a box cutter, that's its name. But to me, I want it to do so much. I want it to do so many things that it is really not able to do right now. The most minimal level design, just a little level design, just a little modular asset construction. Obviously, boxcutter's not built for that. It just isn't. We are going to try to build it for that. I can design tasks to try to get it towards that, but there are 10 trillion systems made from user requests in the past that would actually make that impossible. My goal is never to turn myself into an exploded tool suite of incomprehensible products that the user is unable to tell where they begin and end, because that is the nightmare of everyone. You end up creating a sales funnel that no one's able to navigate through. And so I feel that HardOps is a toolkit able to solve problems when it comes to hard surface modeling, and also general workflow when it comes to helper and assigning materials and the mirror. You know, to me, the core of HardOps is the mirror gizmo. But boxcutter, the core of boxcutter is cutting boxes. which is very strange to say because it is also the most complicated task ever given to a single tool. If you gave a single tool a single task, you'll be surprised how complex that single task can get. And that's all I'm saying. To end this video on a kind of lighthearted note, I know it sounds kind of grim, but really it's not. I will always love boxcutter, and its future is always going to be something to look forward to, unless Blender has something to say about it. But for the most part, until then, work must go on. And that's what I always say, work must go on. My goal is to really just continue working on this until it reaches that final level where boxcutter is both perfectly fast, capable in every scenario, and does the best job ever of cutting a box without anyone having to read a manual or even understand anything that I'm saying in this release log. Like, really, boxcutter should be more educational to the user. So we are designing some tasks right now in terms of basically educating and conveyance, like new systems for displaying tooltips and conveying information has come up. I actually do not like that release logs are only disclosed in the form of videos. Personally, I would like you to scroll through release logs inside of Blender through a button that pops up in an intuitive system. Obviously, if it's me, I'm going to want an intuitive system that's fun to use, that's cool and functional and stylish. That's me. I will always be that level of complex, the level of complex that will want style in addition to function. You know, I'm never saying I want style over function. No, I want them both. I want style and function. I want function and I want to look good while doing it. And that's the purpose of boxcutter. Boxcutter's purpose is to cut a box, but also to look good while doing it. And so over the course of this release log, I demonstrated things from years back, and it really showed how our struggles with Blender and boxcutter have really gotten more compressed over this recent period of time. But it still gives me hope to the future because eventually Blender will be done. They'll be done with what they're doing, and then we will pick up the pieces and get back to work, because when we started, everything was in a pretty stable place. But when we got to work making boxcutter and hard ops, Blender also got to work with whatever they decided they were going to do. They started changing the Boolean modifier, they started changing around the bevel, they started changing around the mirror, they started adding weld. So many things have been added to Blender since we began that it's completely changed the section that we started from. What we started from was so small, and now I feel that Blender is truly beginning to take hard surface seriously. So even if we got erased, right clicking and adding an auto smooth, that's like a tombstone to me, because that's all I ever wanted in Blender, was for auto smooth to be treated a little more importantly. Unfortunately, we got it in the form of a monkey paw, where now auto smooth is a modifier. That's the most important thing you can get, is a modifier, because you always have to be aware of your modifiers. But enough ranting. I apologize for going on and on. This is the part where I would talk about Insolve and how Insolve is this thing that's going to be helping with topology, but I'll spare you on sales pitching, and I will just end the video here. And I thank you all for watching. If you watched this all the way through, stop that. Stop doing that. You know, Boogie is out there apologizing for the 800th time. What are you watching me for? Get out of here. But if you are truly watching me because you're a fan and you just miss me or whatever, like, these words are very kind. I sometimes get so inundated with the negativity of disappointment and disappointing people that I forget about the people who are actually very happy. And I can't get tied up in the people who are very happy, because then I ignore the people who are not very happy. So it's a balance. Here I am ranting again. I will just end this video, and I thank you all for watching. And I'll see you next time, because there's always a next time, isn't there? So I finished the recording, and I was just sitting here jamming out to music, just kind of vibing. And I was like, you know, why not just keep recording? The video's already long as hell anyways, and I'm about to do more box cutter work, so why not just show them what that box cutter work means? So, alright, and the moment I said that, I got punctuated by some news of critical nature. So let's press Control N, we'll make a new file, don't save, and I'm telling you, I'm always being weathered mentally. I just can't even stress it, guys. I mean, people think that I'm living a life of leisure, but really, I am always stressed about bugs. So really, I'm just going to my screenshot folder and just grabbing all of the release log screenshots. and we'll use those to create an image kind of like the hops one. And I guess that's it. So we'll import images, and here's all the images, and we don't even need all of them. I mean, I'm not very skilled in the art of thumbnail creation, so what you're seeing is me just being random. I mean, everything has been me being random. I've kind of learned as I went, and as a result, you know, this journey has been very painful. The journey of hard ops and boxcutter, because, you know, when you don't know anything, it's not good. All right, let me just put it like that. And so, as a result, you know, I ponder the tools very hard, because my goal is always to get back to the art. And in fact, I talk to other add-on creators, and we say the same thing to each other. Hey man, I can't wait to get back to the art. It's almost like a meme. But I am very much trying to get back to the art. I mean, we are all, not saying that anyone isn't, but it's just funny. We all say it to each other. We're like, hey man, what you doing? Oh dude, I'm trying to get back to the art. I'm trying to get back to the art. Dude, I'm trying to get back to the art too. It can be a special support group for artists who basically sign up for endeavors that are beyond them, and as a result, they are taken away from the art. You know, right now, this is the art. The art is me looking at release logs. I've turned the release logs into an art right now. I mean, it's weird. I'm telling you, I'm a weirdo. This is just how I think. But also, I wanted to show this process because I was thinking of an idea, and right now the idea is raw, meaning it's in my brain. So it's in a form that if I convey it to someone else, they'll say, no, I'm not doing that idea. That is stupid. I'm not doing that stupid idea. So I have to figure it out in a way where I can pitch it, and they say, oh dude, that's easy. I could have done that yesterday. Why don't you say it yesterday? That's how you got to pitch an idea. So you got to, this tool has been a art in me learning how to refine my own conveyance of ideas, because I can convey an idea very strongly that I believe in, and then the other party will be like, you know, that's very dumb, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. And believe me, it happens a lot more often than you think. So I'm going to Control A, and we're just going to add a camera, just a regular camera, not even a hops camera. And we'll press N and go under View, and we'll just lock Camera to View. And we're just goofing around, you know. You know, what do we use the tools for? You know, what are the tools for? You know, people ask that, and I so badly want to answer that question because the answer is aligning a bunch of release logs. Just kidding. But anyways, the idea that will be rejected, right, is I want to be able to have a bunch of images as planes, and I just want to be able to draw a box, and the images get resized inside of the plane dynamically to fit inside of it, so that when I have to do this very stupid thing that I'm doing, it's a lot easier. Everything I do, I'm always looking at it from the perspective of, how can that be easier? And also, was that hard? And why was it hard? Does it have to be hard? You know, these are all the questions I'm asking myself over and over as I'm doing stuff. So here, we'll press F12 and look at our render. And who knows how Blender is going to treat me. Also, why is this release log darker than the other ones? It's not like they're more important than the other ones. Now I'm going to have to probably mess with the contrast to make it darker. I don't know. What do I do? Do I just move these out of the way? Do I be pedantic about the color of a release log? You know, do I just move these out? You know what? You're right. And by you, I mean you who said nothing. You who's watching the video being like, wow, MX is going insane and talking to himself, explaining how he has to rehearse idea pitching just to get things done in these tools. But that is fine. These tools have been a lesson in just the will of man, and, you know, the will of tools, and also the will of Blender. Because every time there's ever a victory with these tools, Blender comes to remind us, like, oh yeah, you only win because we let you. It's like, wow. They just remind us, like Thanos snapping. But he's not really snapping anyone out of existence. He's just kind of playing a country riff. That's what's happening. Blender is just snaps, and they're saying, oh, no, we could have killed you. We could have killed you when we added auto smooth. We could have killed you when we did this. We could have killed you when we did that. But instead, I always describe what Blender does as half measures, right? Like, they will add something like this kind of box cutter tool, which I guess it serves its purpose, but me personally, I would want a little bit more options as far as these are concerned, because I spend a lot of time playing with this thing and I just think about it. I really think about it. I'm like, what are they going for? And also it really shows kind of it's like a mirror, you know. Their goal isn't to cut boxes because they could just put it in a cutter collection. Also, I'm about to begin pitching this thing, but it is a thing I think about a lot because this shows how they view make boxes, because that's what you do. You draw a box and you, oh god, that box is stark white like the afterlife. I just saw the afterlife. St. Peter's Gate is through there. Anyways, back to business. We'll turn it off for now, but just saying, Blender's always reminding us, we're here and we could eliminate you, but you know, what kind of grim message is that to say in a video? I am going to try something random, but it worked last time, and that is where I select everything, I shift D, and then I take it into local mode. I was about to shift click something, but that would require me clicking the one underneath. Keep in mind, I duplicated it and now I'm in local mode with it, and now I'm shift clicking to get an active selection, because that's just how Blender works. It's just a weird thing. And now I press Q and I can go in here and we're just going to control click Smart Apply, and now everything is converted to a curve. We're going to join everything together, and let's just try to bring these curves down. You know, I noticed that if you bring them down to 0 and then bring them back up, they're even again. And really all we're doing is creating a emissive border, just so it's not so boring. You know, glare is the savior of everything. I'm not even a good artist. I'm a hack. But little glare, no care. You know, don't tell anybody. But we got to put it as emissive. If it's not emissive, it ain't gonna glow. So, you know, we maybe give it 8. 8's a little dramatic. We'll give it 2. But I figured it'd just be funny to end the video with just something a little more random, because I sounded so grim, and I'm really not. I have nothing but hope and love for these tools. Like, I love them, but I do spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about them, and they cause me real life problems, like serious real life problems, because of my inability to pull myself away. Like, these tools have kind of shown me that I am a mental mess, and that you guys indulging me with tool obsession is possibly unhealthy, but also it has resulted in some of the finest tools. In fact, I did a bunch of songs about it, just goofing off about the finest tools ever made, created in heaven, blah blah. I mean, not trying to say that's my ego or anything, but just being funny. And the songs were quite hilarious. I mean, you know, when it comes to boxcutter is all about the purple. I mean, even though Inset is a son of a gun, Inset is such a son of a gun. It just is. It's a son of a gun. Son of a gun. I was about to make a bunch of gun jokes, but my producer's telling me no jokes about that. 0. He won't tolerate it. He will walk. So now we have our border, but you know, if we're going to be complete hacks, right, we got to have that depth of field, right? Depth of field is where it's at. So let's shift A, add ourselves a empty, and we will just adjust what we're doing. And I don't even want to talk about grim topics, but I can't help it because it's just a part of our world. Our world is people being imprisoned to their dreams. And, you know, I'm discovering this now the hard way, is that life is about having a dream and then becoming a prisoner to it forever, possibly. And obviously that's terrible, but let's render this, and this is what we're getting. And I'm just going to double down on the chances of crashing. So let's use a little power save, because I always love power save, and we're just going to call this BC release log wash. And this is how power save ends up with so many random files. There's so many files that just are not worth power saving. And in fact, that wasn't even supposed to show up in a bug state. I'm embarrassed by that. So continuing on, we're going to jump over to the compositor, and we'll use the nodes and pretend like that did not happen. You know, all sorts of accidental reveals. So here we are looking at just the composite result, and all I want to do is just I want to just get Andrew Price for a minute. You know, when in doubt, Andrew Price, you know. Remember Andrew Price? Just kidding. So I was about to do his accent, but that I'll definitely be causing offense. So we will just avoid all of that. And I feel like Blender is changing in some of these settings because I used to do certain things like a million times, and it's like 1,000,001. It's just a little bit weirder. I mean, maybe I'm just getting old, which is also a thing. Like, I mean, believe me, I spend all my time now in fear of age. Like, I never realized how much I've aged over the course of this project. Never thought that. Like, you know, I started off beautiful, guys. I mean, not really beautiful, but, you know, I could look at myself in the mirror. Nowadays, I'm like, oh my God, I need a filter on this mirror. So let's bring over our image, and, you know, if we're going to do anything to it, let's hit it with an RGB curve. We didn't even do this to the original one. I'm just giving this one a little extra because we're being fancy. But, I mean, if you're going to go into compositor, you always got to hit it with the RGB curve. You know, just a little S will always do you good. I mean, I kind of want the glare to be a little bit more extreme. In fact, let's Alt-V just to really zoom in. And, you know, subtle is where it's at. Me, I always take it to a level called too much, and then I divide it by half because I don't know what I'm doing, and then divide that by half because I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know, it's just an expansion on a piece of advice I received a long time ago that I still live with. Just like someone telling me, you don't know color, just use one color and everything else is a shade of gray, or just use only shades of gray. That's what they told me, and they sounded so sincere in it. I just took it as truth. I mean, I don't know, maybe I am permitted to use color now, but I do find myself defaulting to one color because who knows, I don't know what I'm looking at with color. I just see colors, and we're just darkening the edges, and really that's it. Just the most basic compositing tutorial ever. Not really trying to knock it out the park or anything. I mean, really, if we're able to get through this compositing tree without it crashing, the compositor is going nuts too. That's what I mean. Blender is in a very strange place right now. Like, Blender's evolving, but some of the evolutions aren't complete on the other side. And that's the part that makes us frustrated because we had so many ideas, and those ideas are being cut off without replacements. And here I am ranting again. Let's go back to our viewport, and this is what we're looking at. So let's see what it looks like if we have the glare just really out there. I know I'm using old school Eevee, and you're like, what the hell? There's a new Eevee. Why are you not using that? It's because I'm a scared. Radius. Oh, it's the intensity. Oh, wow. All right. Claire's like, hold my beer. I got you, bud. And we're just looking at our final render result, and that will do. So with something like this, I will take it into Affinity and then do further edits. But Affinity, I think, got bought by another application, so that will bring me into another rant about how 3D is this disintegrating field of companies buying other companies and how we're losing entire pipeline sectors to corporate interests, and it's just terrible. It's just terrible. But I know, I ended up on a gloomy note again. Look, guys, boxcutter worked out great. It's working great. Wow, seeing through it looks crazy. I mean, I just love Blender's viewport. Just sometimes I'm just in love with the viewport. People talk about rotating your viewport around and that just being a thing. And I mean, let me grab my space mouse. We're just rotating around the viewport. And I mean, look at all these beautiful features, refinements, updates, and things that really don't matter. Like, for example, we zoom in on the mirror gizmo. Mirror gizmo doesn't work. It's on semicolon. That's why it's on semicolon. Really, with mirror is 1, 2, 3. It really is, but we need to take away 1, 2, 3 so you can have numerical entry in boxcutter. We just have to, so get used to the mirror gizmo. We need to find a hotkey for it, and it cannot be on a number anymore. Mesh element snap. Mesh element snap matters. I love mesh element snap, but, you know, we're just being goofy here. You know, font cutter, bro, don't even get me started. We're just goofing off in this release log, just talking about all the awesome things that have been happening and how there's even more to come. But to do that, we have to get down all the things that we've done at least to this point. So I know everyone's always wanting some great large feature to just change everything, But just know that every time we do that, Blender comes along and says, boom. What'd you try to do? Boom. You did nothing. You're nothing. Boom. And it's over. So, maintenance mode. Sorry. Got gloomy again. I will end this video, and I thank you all for watching. I'm sorry I keep getting gloomy. That is my life. But I will leave for now, and I'll see you guys next time.